The best example I can come up with from my own memory is when one of the later generation 3D consoles, but this was back in the day, keep in mind. So this was when stuff was starting to really become impressive, but very much the heyday of the hardware war. It was probably like the Xbox 360 or something. And I go into a local, I think it was a Target or something, and they have one of these systems on display. I don't think they were even for sale yet, but they had one sort of demoing. And there was this boxing game. Mm-hmm. And they had these, for the time, incredibly high poly, incredibly well textured boxers doing their thing. And they were like, what may as well have been ray-traced beads of sweat following physics dripping down these boxers' arms. You know what I mean?
Right.
And the game played horribly. It played horribly. All of their development time, all of their focus was on showing off the technology. And meanwhile, the gameplay was just the characters, the control was terrible. The characters moved in an incredibly unnatural and unrewarding way. It was just uncreative. There was no redeeming quality to the actual game as a game, but it had the wow factor of the technology.
Right.
And don't get me wrong.
The selling point was the detail of the boxers and whether they looked exactly like the boxers. And, nothing wrong with people who love that kind of stuff. That's fine. People are fans of things like that.
And it's great that creative people have that kind of horsepower that they can use.
Right.
The problem is, all too often, you end up with companies, studios, that place the budget and the time and the manpower and the skill. They even decide who to hire, and it's all the focus suddenly becomes on people that are going to show off the technology instead of people that are going to design really compelling and fun games. And I definitely noticed that shift. And don't get me wrong, there's some really fantastic 3D franchise. Some of my favorite games are 3D games. But there was this massive, like I said, even starting with the Super Nintendo, there was that little drop down once they were really focusing on showing off the new technology, in that case with Mode 7. But there was no 3D, and then all of the studios, they were still competing. Now that that technology was established, they were still competing at a very high level, and we still had all of the 8-bit games and the Genesis/Mega Drive games before then that set the bar pretty high for creativity and gameplay. So the bar got raised back again pretty quickly. The games after the first generation, in general, were doing great with gameplay and creativity and stuff like that. But then when 3D hit, there were a lot of really bad games that everyone was so distracted. Like, I can remember when we got a PlayStation, when it was the new thing that everyone had to have, and we were super excited about games like Battle Arena Toshinden because of how great it looked. And go ahead and try playing that game now.
You're right.
See, you know what I mean? You could go back and play Super Mario 2 or 3 and have a blast.
Yeah, even to this day, yeah.
You pick up most of the first generation 3D games, and even the ones I loved at the time, like, I absolutely loved the Wipeout franchise. I still have very high respect for it. But I went back somewhat recently and tried to play the very first one, and it was amazingly slow due to, presumably, not only the hardware constraints at the time, but also people weren't used to hyper high-speed 3D racing games yet, right? So if they made it as fast as, like, the third installment of the game, where it was incredibly fast because the technology and the sort of the players were now getting used to faster and faster racing. It's an amazing franchise, but
and it was sort of like even the early 2D games where people were still trying to find their footing in terms of what worked best. Right. So that's what we were getting at the beginning of that 3D era. I remember, and this speaks to a different franchise, but the Twisted Metal games. I always had the thought that they hit their pinnacle with Twisted Metal Black on the PS2, which was almost, I think it was a launch title, if not very close to being a launch title. One of the first PS2 games yet masterfully made, right?
Right.
And I remember after playing that game, when I first got it back in the day, I was like, oh, this makes me kind of nostalgic for the older Twisted Metal games. So
Right.
I popped in Twisted Metal 2 and tried to play it again. And it was so massively worse. I mean, don't get me wrong, classic game, really creative and fun at the time. But the physics were so bad, and the controls were not there, you know.
Right.
But they had refined it so much over the years that see, it took 3D games almost a whole generation to get to that point where they were feeling really nice and refined and beautiful, and you know. So I think that's the lesson to be learned, is like there were some good early PS1 games that, you know, there was things like the Tekken series, and there was some good stuff in there, but there was a lot of stuff that you would play and you're expecting something great. You might see a good screenshot, but then once you play it and you see it moving, you're just like, wow.
But that is the interesting thing about 2D versus 3D as sort of artistic genre, or I don't know what the perfect word is for it, but they're two different but related art forms. But if you go back, like, I could easily pick up old 16-bit fighting games. Like, I especially liked the SNK, King of Fighters, Garou, Mark of the Wolves, stuff like that. I play one of those games even to this day, and it's still beautiful and it plays incredibly well. Right. I loved the Tekken franchise in its prime up to Tekken Tag Tournament, which is a fantastic game. Extremely fun, especially if you have like a brother or a friend or a roommate to play with.
I had that game too. Yeah, I loved it.
Yeah, I mean, good luck going back and enjoying Tekken 1. You know what I mean? The pixel art aesthetic holds up drastically better than early, grimy, grainy, low poly 3D at a bad frame rate.
Right.
You know, it just, and I think it has a lot to do with the fact that in the case of 2D art and pixel art, even though there's these color limitations and stuff like that, you're seeing the direct results of the work of human artists, right? So even though it's low resolution, even though it's low color, drastically more so than the power of the PlayStation to make a 3D game, the actual art is being filtered and degraded through these hardware limitations before it ends up on your screen in the case of 3D games. So a 3D artist has to design a model, they conceptualize it, you know, presumably at a higher resolution with better texture, but then they have to make it work within the system with all the other stuff that's going on. So they degrade it, and then, you know, by the time it ends up on the screen, being rotated and rendered, and then there's further color reduction issues and texture warping issues and all these other things.
And then you take into account the added, I don't know what you would call this, but like the fact that the player in a 3D game is mostly controlling the camera and the composition on screen. So they may never get a good look at this enemy that you've spent all this time crafting. You know what I mean? Maybe that enemy pops up so much in a certain area of the game, and then the player flies through that area and they're on to the next thing. And like, you know, you as an artist would look at that and be like, man, I really put a lot of time into that guy, you know, and this player just blows through it in this playthrough.
That's a really good point. Yeah, you know? When someone's doing 2D graphics, whether it be cartoon animation or video game animation, you know exactly, the artist knows exactly what perspective the viewer is going to be seeing this animated character. They only have to animate the character for this one super specific angle. So it's guaranteed that the best choices that this artist made to communicate these things, to express the movement and attitude and intentions of this character in the moment, exactly the best possible version of that is on screen, guaranteed 100% of the time. Whereas with a 3D game, like you were hinting at, a 3D modeler models it, and then they've got these restrictions for polygon count and everything like that. So they're going to use most of the polygons for the stuff that's considered aesthetically the most important. So it could be the face, it could be the front of the character. But when you're playing the actual 3D game, you might never see. So, and then they 3D animate an attack or whatever, or this cool dying animation. But the odds that you're ever going to see it in the ideal angle for that animation to play is astronomically low.
Right.
So that's another good point. It's just I really think that, I think we figured it out. That is why 2D pixel art games hold up so much better than early generation 3D games. The artist is able to adapt to and use at 100% everything at their disposal to directly communicate with no lossy degradation, no translation, so to speak, through the system itself to end up giving you a display. And the camera thing is another really big issue. And of course, the camera was one of the longest things. A lot of games still wrestle with it in 3D games. Just the wonky camera, the AI of the camera so often just can't figure out where to go sometimes, and it can be incredibly frustrating and mess up your experience. I think we should force the conversation to end pretty soon. This video is going on pretty long. I hope it was entertaining for everyone. Are there any other thoughts that you wanted to cover, Corey, before we wrap this up?
No, I think that pretty much covers it.
All right. Yeah, I mean, I'll just really quickly, you had grabbed some screens. Let's see if anything pops up to us. Yeah, I mean, it's just really revolutionary. Oh, yeah, I did want to just quickly, for other artists out there, I wanted to pick on the cartooning on this box art just a little bit. And this fist is just incredible. I don't know what happened here. The thumb is its own separate egg.
Right.
That's glued to the sides of his fingers, and then there's extra lumps. Especially this right here is just very strange. And then, yeah, I think you spotted this too. This looks like it's supposed to be the back of his hand wrapping around, and these are his 3 fingers. Otherwise, why would the leaves be covering and pushing back that other finger so much? When you grab something, that's not what happens.
Right.
So
and even just comparing the two hands.
Yeah, this one is massive.
They're so they're drawn differently.
Right,
you know,
exactly. Different drawing style. This one is supposed to be further back than this one because it's behind the torso, behind the head. This one's in front of the torso, in front of the head, in front of that arm. So this one is closer up, but it's smaller. And then you've got this. It's like he is having a severe allergic reaction to bee stings or something on this hand.
Sure, yeah.
And there's a magic levitating egg. And then the other thing that looks really weird is the placement of this leg. It looks like it's coming out of the center of his pelvis, kind of like R2-D2 had that middle leg in the front. Which the problem there is because the artist put this line, which is like a sort of cuffing effect where the pants are kind of bunching up on the top of the shoe, but it creates the illusion of like that sort of the back of the calf, when in actuality this line is supposed to be the back of the calf. Right. And then that means this is the bend of the knee, and this can be considered the thigh. But this line comes down to too sharp of an angle. And this line, those two lines conflict each other, which pinches off the leg too much and makes it feel like it's coming out of the center of the torso instead of the leg kind of starting here and going up. And then the other weird thing is this is supposed to be obviously the heel of a shoe, but instead of sticking out, it does this weird kind of folded in thing. So, but anyway, like I don't want to, obviously everyone's at different skill levels and everyone has, they work under time constraints and stuff like that, and they get art sent back to them. But it's just these are the things to keep in mind if you're doing an illustration, is just make sure if something's closer up, then it's bigger than the other thing, which you presume is going to be the same size. Like the hand, 2 hands. Usually they're about the same size on the same person. But it was just funny to see this box art after decades and see these glaring illustration problems. I guess we will wrap it up there. And and then here's the 3 box, which the cartooning got much, much better by then. I'm guessing a different person, but you never know. But anyway, so that is it for this conversation. Thanks as always for watching, and thank you, Corey, for helping to make this video and an interesting conversation.
No problem.
And thanks for watching.